Oh, come on. Hello. Oh, great. We're all awake now. So I'm Liz Amos, and this is Christopher Day, and we're both at the National Library of Medicine. And we're going to talk about the NIH CDE Repository, or Common Data Element Repository. This is actually I guess you could call it a forms library in a lot of sense. And it's designed to provide back-end infrastructure to those developing collections of CDEs so that researchers who are either recommended or required to use forms from NIH are able to find those. And so with that, Christoph is the brains behind the operation.
How much time do I have? 15 minutes? Okay. So I'll have to drive as I speak. So, oh, you can drive. I put some notes here, things that I want to talk about, and well, so I think I'm officially the data architect. Basically, I built this thing, and I wanted to show a few things, and maybe we'll start with the forms. I wanted to show how I think that if you want people to adopt things, you have to make it very easy for them to use it, and you have to make it very high quality. That's been my experience, generally speaking. So we want to give the ability to create forms that are very true to the original form, that are easy to build and that are easy to find. Maybe we can find a couple of examples of forms, like maybe LaTeX forms.
What's the standard from? Yeah, why don't you come over to this side, Christoph.
So we have multiple registration statuses for forms. Some of them, many of them are not visible by default if we're still working on them. And in this case, I think we're waiting for copyright issues. But anyway, the form looks pretty good. That's a good example of a form that should be able to be reused right out of the box. And I'll show you how these forms can be reused. And you can click the printable version here. This is our way that we render forms. They're all electronic forms, but we have a default way to render them. If you want to, I'll show you a few things about this. This is a really large form. I think about 130 questions in it, and you can scroll real quickly. Most of them very simple. It's a question followed by a list of answers.
Multi-select. Checkboxes.
Sometimes a checkbox, sometimes radio button. Sometimes you'll have answers that depend on the answer that you entered right before, so you can have what we call sometimes skip logic or follow-up logic. Sometimes you'll have some numbers. Sometimes you have images to help you answer certain questions. You'll have units of measures. You'll have all of the things that are basically supported with respect to data types, things like that. So that's one example of a form. Another example, maybe we can show the height, one of the height protocols in Phoenix. We'll show that really quick. So that'll give you an idea of forms that are ready to use. So I'll start, actually I'm starting kind of at the end, and then I'll drill down a little bit how you can use these things, how you can find these things. Let's the height protocol. That's good. Right, so that's another example, very similar. I think in this case we have a bit of skip logic. These protocols come right out of Phoenix. They were imported, and then Liz spent a significant amount of time to fix them so that they're actually ready to use in their own. So here we have examples where you might take inches, and then you'll have your height in inches or in feet or whatever it is. And then maybe one last one is the immunization that I like to show, though I don't think it's quite finished, but it shows another way that we can render forms. I think we could put an pencil there. Do that first. This is only 3 questions, but these questions repeat based on a particular question. This maybe you can see that. But in this case, it's displayed as a table, so you have multiple answers. This is actually very common. A lot of the forms that we have are displayed as a table, either like a family history or disease type or things like that, and it's really the repeating question. So it's very easy to create these forms and then reuse them. We have many exports. This is one of the exports. Other exports will be the ListHill export.
Do you want to mention logging in real quick?
You can log in, and if you want to log in,
you have to log in to export.
Oh, that's true. So then if you need an account, you can request an account, and I believe anyone can get an account for free at UMLS. This is going to redirect you to another account. You get UMLS, you'll get all the UMLS codes and everything. Some of the codes are actually hidden unless you're logged in. Yeah, when you're logged in, you can export to all these formats. One of them is hidden, but the most accurate format is the first one. That's exactly the export of our database. So you can click this. Oh, very nice. And this is exactly the export. So if you want to get the data the way that we display it, this is it right here. It's fairly clear how it works. It's basically a hierarchy of questions, and as you saw, it should be fairly readable for everyone to understand how it works. If you understand a little bit of JSON, there's the exact equivalent in XML. If you like XML better, but that's exactly the same thing. And then you have XML in an SDC schema. And if we click this, I think we're going to see some XML. Now, that is very different from the XML that would give you a lot of things because it is transformed into a schema that was defined by a group at ONC, I suppose is the way to put it. Then there's a transformation here happening. Some things will be supported, some things will not be quite supported. There should be a rendering of this. It's not going to work the best on this particular form, but we can try it and see what happens. On some of the forms, it will look much better than this. They offer also a way to transform XML using XSL into HTML. So you can actually render the form, but you can render it in anything you want really once you get the XML. We have export to ODM as well and RedCap, and then I want to move on because otherwise I have like 12 boxes here. Okay, so another thing I want to show is the way that you can embed our search into any website that might be your website. I have a demo of this. You know by heart?
I wrote it down.
Okay, great. So I put this on a free server purely for demo, and everything is fake on there, but for demo purposes it works well. And I think, Carrie, we have actually a real one, but I don't know the URL. So because it's a free server, it's actually booting it up. But what it does is it will allow you to put an iframe into your own website. You put all of your content around it, and then click NINDS. I think that's a pretty good one. So again, this is absolutely not the real NINDS site, but this is an example of how you may be able to embed the NINDS query onto your own site, whether it is NINDS or not. So this search will now be served onto your own site, but we're going to serve it. So it goes down to our own backend. Classification, and that's going to retrieve this. So one of the things that we give you with this is there's a lot of customization that you can do. In this case, the CDE ID that we show is not our CDE ID, but the NINDS CDE ID. If you were, so other IDs might be Phoenix ID or CADSR ID or whatever. You can show this. You can label it anything you want. You can show classifications or not. You can show other names. Sometimes people care about question text. You can show this. In this case, I made it pretty close to what the original NINDS website had, but obviously you will want to configure it for your use case. So that's one way that you can have a search engine on your site without spending any money doing it. Another thing I want to show very briefly is how you can actually take these forms, and this seems like it's a fine one, and you can go to export and publish, and just quickly click this. Now, to show this, I would have to have an actual URL that it would push data to. But it will create a form and completely freeze it forever so that no one can change it, not even you can change it. But then any data that you submit to that form will be submitted to that endpoint. That's your endpoint. That's up to you to see. So, when I do a demo of this, for example, I might use a Google spreadsheet, and you will be able to pull out the form, type all that data, and it's going to submit to a Google spreadsheet. I'm going to briefly talk about all of these things that I showed here are all accessible via API. The easiest thing you can talk to me about how that works, but if you do export to JSON, that's going to show you an example of an API at the top. This is basically the form endpoint followed by the ID of the form, and you get that. You can get it by the ID at a given point, or you can get it by a version ID, which may be the same ID but a different version, so that the form won't change. This form will not change. It will always be the same. That's going to take me to my next point, which is auditing. every change that we do into the system to a form to a CD gets audited. So we never trash the previous version. Sometimes we have dozens of prior versions. You can version them so that you can see the major updates, but you're going to see some of the changes that we did to this. It's actually not that many. And you can click multiple of them if you want. That's part of what you can do. And click compare, and it might show you what the differences between these two versions. In this case, simply change the status from incomplete to qualified. Sometimes it's a lot of changes. Just speaking briefly about harmonization, that's one of the most difficult problems, of course. We have multiple ways to do that. One way is to use the merge feature. You can put two forms. Maybe let's put two forms that might be similar. They don't really have to be all that similar, but we can put them into what we call the quick board, and that's the little plus button. So that's a good one because everybody, of course, a lot of institutes will use that form, and everybody redefines the form their own way. So let's do plus, and then we'll go to quick board, and we're going to go to the form quick board. And then we should be able to click side by side. That's going to give us a comparison of the two forms side by side. And actually, if you were an owner of both of these forms, or at least the form that you're going to retire, you're going to have a button here that says retire that form. It's going to merge all of the CDs from that form on the left to the form on the right. So that's a way to bulk harmonize CDEs and harmonize the forms, so that instead of two forms, you now only have one form. It stores all the IDs, so you can still refer to the old ID that you used to, but it puts it all in the new form now. You can also, of course, still find the old form, as that's the one you want to continue using, but it will retire the old one. And I wanted to also show very briefly how, with maybe one of those bricks forms, Liz took a lot of the standard forms, such as, I think, mostly the promise form, and then created a list of forms, about 15 or so, for NNR. And even though that form looks pretty full and complete and a lot of questions, if we look at the description of the form on the second tab, I think it is actually quite simple. It's just the aggregation of two forms. One form they use on all of the NINR forms, and then the second form is pediatric short form. So we can go to that, and that's the original form from Promise. A lot of the pages will have linked forms at the bottom. Let's try to do that and see. We can see that this is actually used on that form. You can do that from CDs and from forms to find out if a form or a CD is used on something else. You click that button. Maybe on a CD we can find data sets to show that. And I think it's Phoenix marital status or something like the first one. When these CDs are linked to actual data sets, they can be stored here. In this case, because it's age and it's very, very common, it's linked to hundreds of data sets. All of them are in dbGaP. If you are using the CD and you want to indicate that you actually have data sets that you can look up, it would go here. Very briefly, what can I say? I talked about auditing. I want to talk about organizing very quickly. How these forms are organized, or the CDs are the same way, is that they're essentially organized by institutes or by organization. At a very high level here, we have about 12 or so. Each of these will have their own organization. They'll have their own tree, the way that they organize their forms. A good example is NINDS because they've really classified their data very well, because you have disease and domain, so we can search by disease, for example. But every institute will do it differently. If you want to reuse an NINDS form, if you want to change an NINDS form and you're not an NINDS, you can't do that. But if you want to reuse an NINDS, then you can do it. You're going to go in to that form, you click one of those forms, and then we'll go to that tab that says classification. And you can always click, if you have an account and if you have an organization that you maintain, you can classify this form. You can also classify all the CDs. And so, I mean, very briefly, that's what you do. And you can also create boards. Not much time to do that, but that would be your way to organize your own things. Maybe you're doing a study or something, and briefly, but it's not something that you want the public to see. You can create as many boards as you want. Liz, of course, has many boards here. They're all aggregated, so she's organized them. NINDS forms going, blah, blah, blah. You can make some of the boards public and then share them with other people. You can even do what do we call that? We start a review and invite people to review your form. And then we can click on almost all of the items. You can click this discuss thing. This looks exactly like Google Works. Same as people start putting comments, then it works across all of your computers, so people can comment and then reply to comments and things like that. And then also very briefly, we talked about the codes. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to talk about after that, but maybe let's show on the CDEs some examples of CDs that are attached to code. Actually, NCI.
Christoph?
Yes.
One thing you might want to show, because it's not visible in those screens, is how you can reuse a data element across different forms. You know what I'm saying? So you've got the same. You were showing how age was linked to a lot of different data sets, but can you show how age, all the forms, for example, that use age?
Okay, we'll show that. Actually, we'll show a little bit more about the forms, and if I have a few minutes, and if not, you can stop me anytime. Let's just show a few codes. So these look like limit codes, not or normal codes. This is not a very good example, but maybe this one. And then permissible value. This is mapped to UMLS, and if you're mapped, the reason it's not a good example, if you're mapped to one of these four, then currently it's supported to do this anonymity because UMLS actually gives you these APIs. You can use these APIs yourself, but we just make it easy for you. You can see that these last two codes actually are in SNOMED CT, not the first one, as far as this thing is going. If you look at the other interesting thing is if you look at any of the NCI CDs, almost all of them should work perfectly. We've loaded all of the NCI standard sets, so those that they consider standard at NCI, let's click one of any of them. This is good. And go to permissible values. Because this is linked to NCI, you should be able to click UMLS, and they should all have UMLS GUIs. If you click CT, then they may or may not have SNOMED code. And LOINC, maybe they won't have LOINC. If we pick stuff that is specifically cancer, then it's not very surprising that they would not have. But sometimes they do, of course. And okay, so let's take a CD and show how it's used on multiple forms. Or even one, any Phoenix or C. Yes, this is good. And then you click link forms. That will show you the forms that it's linked to. We can go to that form. Right. So this one is used on a lot of forms. Yeah. Let's go to one of these forms, maybe the bricks one, because I know you can edit this. I just wanted to show how you can edit forms. So we try to make everything very easy. The editing forms is definitely not easy. There's so many use cases with forms, especially with skip logic and things like that. So let's look at one of maybe the second one. And we can go to the form description now. Just briefly, actually, we're going to almost change everything here very soon, but the idea stays the same. You can click any of these pencils. Maybe not this one. Let's click gender code.
Hey, hang on a second. While you're there, I just want to make a comment here because, we are talking about CDEs and how they relate to data, I think, in this meeting. And one of the advantages in this, you can see like gender code is linked to a CDE and age is linked to a CDE. That's where this, like dimension, if you want to call it, the description of the dimension for that data is in the CDE, and you could potentially combine data that has used the same CDE. So if your forms carry those connections and then you publish your forms with your paper, then someone could like search and see the CDE ID as opposed to trying to match up the names, and then be able to aggregate data based on different data sets that use the same CDE ID, even if they didn't use the same form. So I think that's an important characteristic about this is with the common data elements, what you're trying to do is have a unique identifier that can, an atomic element that can be used across many different settings. That's all. Thanks.
And then, so this is how you would edit your form, and if you want to, for example, add skip logic, you would show it here. It will try to help you by, auto-following thing. Here you might leave your age in years greater than 25, for example, or something like that. Could I move this? And so, right, so you say age greater than 25. Sometimes you will say age is empty. Those are possible logic scenarios. If you don't know your age, you have a follow-up question that says, why don't you know your age, basically. And if we scroll up, we can get these are the values, of course, sometimes have skip logic. And then if we do show question area or show form, whatever this thing is going to bring up this is actually going to change very soon. It's going to bring you this search, and you can find any CD in here, drag and drop it into your form and create forms this way. Or you can drag and drop other forms into your format and then build forms rapidly if you know that you want to use standard instruments, and that's the way that it's going to work. So we're good about it.
Okay. Question?
So for each element has its own UID, right?
Yeah,
I guess the generated by.
Yeah. So let's look at it. Let's look at a CD. So first, I went through everything very quickly, but if we look at this is a CD, and we can look under identifiers. They all have an NLM identifier, and that identifier stays.
Identifier will stay even like going to the ID. But stays before.
Yeah. So this particular identifier stays even across versions. There's also an identifier that is hidden right here, but that you can find, which is specific to this particular instance of the element, if you know that's what you want to use. And all of these other IDs, for example, here we record the variable name. This would be an ID in FITBR, but Phoenix will have protocol IDs, or then they all go in here. So a lot of elements will have multiple IDs. And the more you merge them, the more IDs they will have.
So early on, actually Greg isn't here, Greg Farmer, but I kind of addressed one of his things is that this site at NLM really helped us define the variables, the data elements that were used in the nursing grid. So the nursing didn't go out and reinvent data elements and different definitions, different physical values. They went to NLM, they saw it was there, and reused those, and then actually started collecting data. And we did the same thing with Carrie Guest and NEI. So again, we're not reinventing data elements. We're using the things that we found at NLM.
No, so that's good to hear. And then the key for me from the beginning is to make things easy to do and easy to find and also accurate. And then I think people will use it.
John Greenfield, Standard. This is exceptional. I also used it in preparing this afternoon's demo. And it's just a tour de force of features and capabilities. I have just one wish that Liz heard about at length yesterday, which is that you move as soon as possible from locally unique identifiers to universal unique identifiers that are a little more persistent sounding than DB tiny ID. The moment where all of these forms are identifiable using ideally a URI, IRI identifier, or something like that, is the moment that all of a sudden you're interoperable with the world. Until then, you're not interoperable with anyone outside and the users of the tool, right? So everything is so good and powerful here. That's just my one wish.
So versioning, the Phoenix and other measures, the promise measures, are you most current versions available as they're updated on some of these course websites?
Yeah, so we try to keep up, and so every institute has a different schedule, but I know Phoenix, for example, just released version 21, so we're going to reload that. And for the most part, I think they release maybe every 6 months or so, something correct. And then Promise, I think we have the latest also, but not all of the forms. I think only the short forms and not the banks. But if there's something in particular that's useful, then we're interested in hearing about that. And NDS, we're just about to reload also because we just added a couple of the users. So
I'm sorry for my ignorance, but if one wanted, so first of all, what is the complete scope? Are these simply for all clinical measures, or are there measures that non-clinical as well?
I would say that this is limited to human clinical research, outcome measures, that type of, definitely human, definitely clinical. Some non-clinical, but yes, please.
Actually, to speak directly to that point, the genesis of this was really in support of patient-centered outcomes research and the idea of observational research that would be tied to reuse of data that's collected and stored in EHR systems. We're going to talk more about terminology later today. And one of the things that we've found, and that you'll see on this demo, it's this curation challenge of linking data elements that were originally conceived of separate and apart from the EHR system, and then linking them to standards and terminologies is devilishly hard. And it's an added complexity to both the challenge of harmonization, retroactive harmonization, and the versioning question. But I mean, it's obviously something we have to deal with because it's there. It's just something that we're all going to be grappling with at the exact same time as we go along. So that's fine.
Very nice presentation. Just a question regarding, so you can export CDE format. Can you import as well from REDCap or Clinica definitions?
So the way that there's no batch import in here, so no one but our team can do this. But we have imported from not ODM, but it is very easy to import from ODM actually. But we have imported from REDCap, which is much more difficult because they have all this logic and all of this stuff. But we can do that here. Almost every format that we've imported in is a different format.